I've got a question here from the chat. Tim was asking, what technology is Champignon using for data capture on patients in its own clinics?
What a
Dr.
fantastic,
McIntyre.
that is a fantastic question. That is actually a work in progress, and there's two parts to that. What are the data points, and then what is the data sort of platform or repository? I guess the third part, what's the computational strategy? I love the question, something we haven't talked much about, and that is how are you going to interrogate the data? We always say we interrogate data till it finally confesses, but we need confessions that are true. And in order to do that, we need to use the most up-to-date computational methods, and we now can. I would just say that that's very much part of what we're doing. Now, today, we are not able to select a certain blood test or MRI scan of your brain. That doesn't predict anything at this point in time, whether you're going to respond to a drug or not respond to a drug. And there's a consensus that has really, I think, emerged that not one single data point will be sufficient high definition picture for us to predict. So we're going to need many, many data points that go well beyond the computational capability of your and I brain. We need to have Watson to help us out, so to speak. And so the company is in fact embarking on what we call a transomic data collection, which we'll be doing in our studies, which simply means conversation. We're going to collect your blood, we're going to look at MRI scans, we're going to look at everything we can take from you in terms of data points, and as well as your clinical symptoms and so on. And we're going to be, in fact, using all of these data points to create an informed model, not just of predicting who's going to respond to the treatment, who's not going to respond to the treatment, but also who's going to have side effects and who's not going to have side effects. So the question's a great one. In 2020 going forward, you have to have on your drop-down menu of musts in terms of this area, you need to have a computational approach, and you need to also, again, you can have a fanciful computer and do fanciful things with a high octane computer, but you need to know what data points to put in, and those data points will be clinical data points as well as a disparate assortment of biological data points ranging from genetics all the way up to the brain sort of circuit measures that I talked about a little earlier. So did Dr. Al-Swaden.
So I'm going to go to Nisha and Zamir. Is Andrew Haddad on the line at all? We have a question from him. Andrew?
Yeah, that's me.
Andrew, would you like to pose your question to Nisha?
So in a lot of the anecdotal evidence, let's say the anecdotal stories from patients with successful mental health care outcomes, they often, after psychedelic treatments, they often describe deeply spiritual experiences. Some, experiencing of God or universal energy, or something that comes into direct conflict with what science stands for. And so the question I have is how, in these scientific processes and this scientific research of trying to get to the bottom of what these substances, what these compounds are doing for mental health, how is science grappling with that tension between spirituality and science? I mean, to me, it's almost like two things butting heads against each other, and I'm just curious to hear more about it.
Thanks so much for your question. I think it's a really good question to ask. It's great. I think that when we're looking at diseases like depression, anxiety, PTSD, so much of these diseases are to do with our emotions. And the brain, as we know, is so poorly understood. But particularly when we're looking at disease states that involve our emotions so heavily, as depression, anxiety, PTSD do, it's really important to come together as various different members of the community, from the pharmaceutical industry right the way down to people who use this kind of self-therapy in a non-controlled setting, and we're dealing with emotions after all. So we've really got to look at this in a different way to how we look at other medications, and different people will have very different experiences with this. And I think what's really interesting when you look at people like the CEO of Onnit, Aubrey Marcus, and other people like that, and other researchers like Rick Doblin, who's been researching this for decades. It's fascinating to see the sorts of effects that this has on people in the recreational sphere, but also in communities all over the world who use this as a community, as individuals in the community, to really promote self help and a positive self and mental well-being, and I don't think we should discount this kind of experience. I think what we really do need to do is bring this all together with clinical data and robust clinical data, so that we can present and that we have a greater understanding of these drugs and their effects on different people. But that, you know, generally when you look at what people say about these psychedelic drugs, you know, these drugs enhance empathy, they improve emotional availability and relationships, they increase thoughtfulness and personal well-being, and it's and those things are sort of reproducible in very many people. That's not to say that people who've taken psychedelics haven't had very undesirable effects. So we need to be mindful of that. But when you look at any drug that you put into your body, you are going to have people who respond in the way that you want it to, with desired effects, but you are also going to have people who have the undesirable effects. And that's just pharmaceuticals. We have to be mindful of that.
Yeah, Misha, can I just jump in as well? Because I just want to comment on, like, I know it's easy to tune in a lot of people talking about positive anecdotal experiences and positive recreational experiences, but there's also a lot of information out there about negative experiences as well. So not every psychedelic compound is suitable for every single person. There have actually been some, you know, concerning stories about negative impacts with people experiencing disassociation and things like that. And so there is evidence out there that actually for some patients it's not always the right pathway and can actually set them back. So we do have to be careful about just tuning in the positive messages and kind of getting behind this momentum and just treating this like a trend. Like this is it's a complex area of medicine. There's a high failure rate, and these are, you know, significant medical interventions as compounds. I mean, the kind of the sensation I think you mentioned earlier on, that is quite, you know, that is commonly associated with one particular type of compound, but there are other compounds. So one of the ones we're looking into, for example, is ibogaine. Patients who take ibogaine in order for treatment-resistant depression and alcohol addiction and things, describe it as an incredibly unpleasant experience. One that, however, has in their words, a very positive outcome for them and helps them with their addiction. So it's not, you know, we need to be careful with this, and we need to, you know, approach it sensibly. This isn't just, oh, I'm going to go on a trip and, you know, feel all warm and fuzzy and follow the light. That's not what this is about. These are significant experiences, and they're not all positive. Like even in some of the, like, for example, some of the clinics, I think there's one here in the UK and also in the Netherlands, is when we talk about where the environment where this happens, that matters significantly. So some people who've had treatments in, say, like the Netherlands, some people have had great experiences with that. Other people have had terrible experiences because of the environment and the setting they were in, and the people that were helping them through that experience. So you know, there's a lot to work through, and I think we just need to be really balanced on what's happening.
If I can chime in there real quick, I've personally seen patients who've had bad experiences in my practice. And though we're looking at these compounds sometimes to treat PTSD, I've treated a patient who developed PTSD because of a bad trip, an extremely bad trip. He wasn't prepared. He was in a wrong setting. He was being attacked throughout the trip. It lasted for hours. And, you know, we're talking 10 years later, he still has PTSD symptoms for which I needed to use traditional antipsychotics and SSRIs to treat the negative impact of using LSD. He used LSD in a wrong dose, in a wrong setting, and so on. So I think, you know, Roger spoke to this early on, which is we're still in the realm. I mean, I think I personally believe these are very promising compounds, and I think they could be a huge step in psychiatry. Having said that, I think using them indiscriminately without the safety testing today is akin to using a vaccine for COVID-19 that has not completed phase 3 trials, as is happening in certain places. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's like a broken record, but that's why we need the clinical data and we need the clinical trials and the studies to really get to data-driven, scientifically validated outcomes. You know, like anecdotal is good, it's interesting, it's you know, giving us momentum and it's raising important awareness on this topic. But at the end of the day, we've got to get it through a regulatory framework.
I'm going to ask Dr. McIntyre, Compass Pathway, MindMend, J&J, Champignon, Revive, Atai, and others, like how many companies do you think will come up? And how many can the market hold before it becomes saturated?
Yeah, those are great questions. I think first of all is I think it's great that we have all of these new companies, these new entities in the private sector. The history in psychiatry has shown that we've had, like a lot of things, we have periods of growth and periods of deceleration. And when there's been the private sector interest in psychiatry, we've seen really saltatory leaps forward in not just the treatment options, but also in really the science and attention being given to psychiatry. So I think it's a fantastic reality that we're seeing so many newer companies, larger number of smaller companies, which is expected given what we talked about in terms of the retreat, but certainly some of the larger companies as well. So as a general statement, it's a good thing. Secondly, what I would say is you are going to see some M&A activity. There's no question about that. And I say that just because it's the nature of this beast. It's how things work. And I think I could say that you've named a number of the companies. I know you're giving us a bit of a sampling of the companies. There's others, of course, as you know. And some companies have, I can imagine there's some complementarity with some of the M&A that I could imagine for some of the companies. Frankly, and I say this ruefully, that the world of psychiatry could probably support many, many companies with significant assets in the space. Insofar as the unmet need across these chronic diseases is so vast and so unmet. I don't have a tally in front of me in terms of how many companies are in the diabetes space or in the cancer space, but keep going. But we can probably agree it's many for reasons that are obvious. These are unmet needs. And I think you know, the question as to how many it can support, it's a bit like how long is a piece of string. It's going to really depend. And I think that the guiding principle for me is a significant number. And I think what's also relevant about this is that, look, this is a business. It's a purpose. It's also a business. And I'll focus on the United States, not because I have I sort of do have a bit of an interest in the United States, but it's a laboratory in so many ways. And in the United States, which pays for about 70% of drugs around the world, at least all the profits for these companies, that's where the decisions are often made. And the reality is that pharmaceuticals for psychiatry literally are 99% genericized in the United States, and that's 99%, not as that is the percentage. And so, as a reward to the corporate investment, it's clearly not there on the generic side right now, but there is reward for novel treatments, or at least what the field would describe as novel. And one of our colleagues earlier had made mention of the fact that the FDA has declared some of these medications we're talking about, ketamine, psilocybin, MDMA, as being breakthrough. And I can say this, folks, that the FDA, sorry, a lot of acronyms here, the FDA has never been accused of using a lot of superlatives. And so when they're saying breakthrough, that's quite a statement. I mean, they're like the old professor at university that never gives out A's on the exam to anybody and then somehow gets an A on the exam. That's a pretty impressive paper. And the FDA is sort of that sort of crotchety old professor in some respects. And so the fact that they're referring to these medications as breakthrough is really quite a statement. And so what that means is that at the reimbursement level, there is a reward for the investment at the end of that journey. And this is how these decisions are made. And so I think that the reimbursement market in psychiatry during the last 10 years has been less attractive. Hence, we've seen the retreat. And we're seeing now a pivot towards so-called rapid onset treatments. We haven't discussed this, and it's not really part of the program proper, but it speaks to your question. Last year in March, the FDA also approved the first ever drug for postpartum depression. And postpartum depression is a terrible problem, not just for mom, but obviously for the offspring, etc. And we haven't hitherto had very good fast onset treatments. And there's a steroid drug called Braxianolone. And frankly, it was priced at almost $50,000 US. I've sort of facetiously say the drug works in 1 to 2 days, but when mom gets the bill, she's depressed again. But the point is that this is a very highly rewarding area to sponsors. And I think one can then assume that that's going to attract interest, and it's going to attract interests from multiple parties. And I could also say that we've been talking about these three medicines, again, ketamine already crossed the finish line. I think that they're not just medications, but they're also, in fact, in many ways, proof of concept. They are the first, they're sort of the canary in the coal mine. They're the first ones to make it and really get the attention of Wall Street. This is, in fact, a lucrative, rewarding area. But these folks have, fool me once, fool me twice, that kind of phrase. These companies know that the risk of negative and failed studies in psychiatry is very high. And big pharma is very interested, of course, in the area, but they're not interested in really adopting a football player who's in the pee-wee ranks. They'd like to see someone who's just about to get to the premiership, which in our world means phase 2 studies. So what they're really saying is we would like to see assets not in their infancy, but take that infancy to first in patient, that product to first in patient, show it's safe, and show that it works. And then at that point, we're willing to take a risk. And that's the model you're going to see. And I think that the environment's changing very quickly. We're going to see multiple companies indeed.
Yeah, can I add to that? Because I think we need to be really careful with, there's a lot of interest in this area right now, and there's a lot of momentum. And the value driver is data and clinical outcomes. So to your point, safety and efficacy. I think one of the things I really hope that our sector learns from the cannabis industry that came kind of before us, that while culturally there might be some similarities, there was a flood of cannabis assets that hit the market and IPO, and the valuations were ridiculous. And they weren't based on clinical data. And it got crazy. And that scared a lot of people out of the sector and burnt a lot of people. Unfortunately, CNS is not the sexiest area because it has a high risk. The clinical development is risky. CNS is even riskier again. And so getting capital into trials in CNS is hard, is phenomenally hard work on a good day, So I think, this is why as an industry, we kind of all need to work together and hear each other and focus on patient outcomes and data and what gets them the treatments, and not get carried away with buzzwords and valuations and anecdotal, otherwise, we've had a 50-year setback because of what happened in the 70s. We're now getting the chance to have another go and get this right. We have to do it in a sustainable way. And, piling random money into momentum products that have no clinical data is going to set us back another 50 years. And it's the patients who will suffer because of that.
Can I comment on that? Is that possible?
Sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. Because I don't know if this session's being taped, but what we just heard from my colleague who just spoke on cannabis, I think is the zinger of the afternoon, in the sense that I couldn't agree more. And for me, cannabis is everything that went wrong. In terms of the promise, the hyperbole, the nonsense, some of the malfeasance that went on.
The patient outcome. The patient outcome of all of that was so underwhelming. And, we got poor patient outcomes and gummies. I mean, good Lord.
I completely agree with you. I've been
you guys talking shop. What are you like? Honestly. Right. I'm really sorry to cut you off, but we've got so many student questions. I'll let you do 30 seconds on it, and then we'll have to move to student questions. Sorry.
I just want to say that cannabis is a brain toxin, and it was horrifying to see what companies were doing with that. And I think that whatever that they did is what we definitely don't want to do. So I completely agree with my colleague.
I can't count how many patients I've seen develop schizophrenia and bipolar after high doses of cannabis. I literally can't count them. They're probably in the hundreds.
So Rasmus had we have a lot of questions. I have to say thank you very much to the audience for being, the chat has been on fire, absolutely on fire. So Yora, you had a few questions. Why don't you pose one for Dr. Mo?
How to go about starting a business, for example, if I want to synthesize a drug that takes psilocybin mushrooms or any other drug like that as its ingredient, if they're all class A drugs, how can I even start? Second, how can I test my new drug if the prescription is illegal? How can we even start to make drugs like that legal? Because when it comes to the government, they will want to see a whole pile of results of positive, patients who had improved over time. There is no way how we can prescribe this. These were a couple, and then we were talking a lot about patients with mental health disorders. So if we take that aside, I guess that would be a good base to start with when persuading the government why this is good. But can we use these kind of drugs also as for normal individuals, if you want to call it like that, to supercharge a way of thinking, or to prohibit mental health issues? And if so, how can you measure success? Like, for example, I work in research and we struggle a lot how to prove the efficiency of the research. How can you measure that? If you have a person without mental health issues and you prescribe him a drug and that person still has no mental health issues 2 months down the line, you haven't actually proven anything, did you? So these are a couple of catch-22s that I have in my mind. How do you even go about testing, validating, prescribing, improving the efficiency of such drugs?
I'm not the expert on the business side, but I think in terms of the way out for these medications from purgatory, or these compounds, sorry, from purgatory, is not, I mean, there was something in the chat earlier about people should be free to choose using these compounds. And I think what we're talking about here is putting these compounds in the therapeutic space. And so if we're talking about that, then I disagree. I don't think people should be free to choose. People shouldn't be free to choose to take penicillin on their own at any dose they want. They shouldn't be free to use chemotherapy on their own at any dose they want. I mean, these things should be regulated for obvious reasons. And so if we're going to position these compounds in a therapeutic space to get them out from the darkness that they've been in, as Michael mentioned, for the last 50 years, I think we need to go through the steps we've talked about in terms of proving safety, looking at them in terms of, are they symptomatic treatments or are they disease-modifying treatments, before we look at just optimization of individuals who don't have a specific disorder, and before thinking of it for recreational use. There was a business side to the question that I'd leave to the business folks.
I agree. There was a lot to unpack in that. So I guess the bit that I want to take is about why I think there was a comment about why do we have to show the regulatory agency lots of data. I'm fully in support of sharing data with the regulator, and it's how we should proceed. The regulators, for the most part, people have a lot of opinions on them, but their role in keeping us safe and having adverse effects from drugs, they do quite a robust job, and they should be commended for it. I think the reason why they use data is because that's how you evidence the on-target effects versus the off-target, and when the off-target effects outweigh or whatever the factors are versus the on-target, then it's not a positive outcome. I mean, I think just having free access to whatever medical compounds we want, I think is quite dangerous for a lot of people, because it will have a lot of adverse effect. There might be some people who are not harmed by that, but there will be people who are, and I think we have to take that on balance. I think people some people won't have adverse impacts, but a lot of people will, and they'll have really negative impacts.
I'll just ask this last question and then we'll end. To both, maybe Michael and Roger, is there a chance that big companies are going to exert like a killer acquisition, buy out the small company and kind of withhold the breakthrough that comes out of it?
There's a bit of cynicism to that, but I think it's a healthy cynicism, and I think that it's true that, look, if you're a pharmaceutical company and the treatment that you've just invented, so to speak, is a treatment that cures the condition, the patient never needs to take it ever again, some might say, what's the business model here for us? Now, unfortunately, or fortunately, I think it's unfortunately, quite frankly, from a human perspective, despite what you've heard anecdotally, we don't have a treatment yet that will reset your brain circuit that forevermore you're cured. Now, there are some people that'll happen, that'll happen for some people, but that's not, they're going to be the very fortunate group, a very lucky group. But unfortunately, that's not how these drugs yet have performed. And I don't think this wave will do that. So I guess, fortunately, there's still the business model of repeat use. It'll be intermittent use, but it'll be repeat use. But no, I do think you're going to see acquisition. You're going to see that for sure. We're going to need that, frankly. It'll be good for the space. But I hope, and I don't think it's going to happen in the short term, that you're going to see the monopolization. It's not going to be like the social media world where you have complete and total monopolization of the tech world. There's still going to be the need for some of the smaller innovation, and those companies will be funded. The market, public market's been supporting this, and the reward is there. So I think in the short term, you're going to continue to see this innovation, ingenuity. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think what I'd like to add to that is, I mean, I think I kind of, the premise of, big pharma doing a catch and kill kind of strategy, I think is a bit cynical and a bit kind of, a bit negative on the life science industry, to be honest. And I don't think it's realistic in this case. I think what's important to recognize is, we've sort of alluded to it through this conversation, is, we're at an early stage, but as we get into the distribution of this is an assisted therapy. This is not something you take in a bag and go home and do. There are going to need to be clinics. There's going to be to support, like, if the average trip takes up to 6 hours to work through, that's a lot of time with a medical professional accompanying you through that in an important, in a space that's safe and supports the efficacy of your treatment. And that, that across, a continent the size of Europe or a country the size of America, that's a huge investment. That's very capital intensive to get that rolled out. This isn't going to be like we crank up a factory and start churning out 30 million tablets and everyone takes one a day. The model of kind of what comes next and where this goes is very, very different. So I think, I think we need to keep that in mind.
Well, with that, I'd like to thank our panelists for a very fascinating and interesting couple of hours. I'd like to thank the audience, the people who joined us. Thank you all. Please, in the chat, you can there's a link to join the WhatsApp group for faculty. We'll be sure to keep you up to date and send you emails with our future events. Thank you all. Stephanie, do you have anything to add?
I just really want to say thank you very much to everyone who's signed up to this event. Thank you to the speakers. It's just been outstanding. Dr. David Rabin, Dr. Roger McIntyre, Misha, and Michael Cuniff, and who, I don't know if anyone else is on the call. I think everyone's left now. Dr. Mo, and it's just been outstanding. Professor Nico Sava, it's just been amazing. I just love what everyone had to say. And thank you very much to Suresh Ghalsasi. And thank you very much to MJ for hosting this. And thank you to everyone who's joined the event.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roger.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.